Is it a DAO when you have different definitions of token-based or reputation-based community gathering? Okay, so I like it to call it more like a digital organization, and that's it.
In this moment of Web3 organizations creating themselves and deciding what is the blueprint and what is the pattern for them to exist and how to run themselves in an organization, we have this moment, this window of opportunity to do something a little bit differently. I try and push people to say, like, all right, if you are trying to exist in an ecosystem, if you are trying to build in a way that is composable, that is interoperable, how do you learn from the best of the best that have ever done it throughout the history of time, which to me is nature.
I think it's really the first time like everyone in the world can participate, create something, and the world is different now. It's like so connected, and I find it beautiful. I'm always a bit too optimistic, but I'm really have hope for this space and where this is going.
Hi everyone, it's Jordan from the NEWFORUM team. NEWFORUM is the community podcast that invites purpose-driven visionaries, creators, and investors to spark accessible conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, NFTs, and everything Web3. And on today's forum, we are focusing on design. How do we standardize the design experience on Web3, designing wallet security, DAOs, the connections between nature and Web3? To answer these questions, we're honored to have Shuya Gong, Design Director, System Change at IDEO, Sio, Design Lead at Aragon and Interaction Designer at We3, as well as Hugo Hoppmann, Designer and Creative Director, working for clients including Apple, Nike, 032C, and Newfoundation. So welcome, and let's start if everyone is ready. So the first question is, how did you get introduced to Web3 and what kept you involved and interested? So maybe we can start with Shuya.
Hi, thanks for the intro. So nice to be here with all of you. I'm Shuya, and this is a funny story. I think that my backgrounds in Web3 and design sort of started at the same place, and it's interesting to see how Web3 has emerged alongside how design has changed over the past decade or so. And in 2015, IDEO created a lab called the Bits Blocks CoLab, and it was really this space to try and explore what does the future of financial institutions look like with new technologies such as blockchains and Bitcoins. And I think that this was even before Web3 was a concept. It was like, we're talking about crypto at the base layer of what it was. And so that summer, we were really spending some time with Citi, Fidelity, NASDAQ, and Intercore to understand, like, okay, as large financial institutions who hold a lot of power and a lot of sway in this space and ecosystem, what are you worried about? What are the hard problems and things keeping you up at night about distributed ledger technologies? And also, where do you see this going? And so over the course of that summer, it was exploring everything from what does a digital twin look like? What does it look like to have different ways of getting into wallets, things like fractional ownership of real estate. And so everything from things that we have seen in the past 7 years exist and come to be in the Web3 space, and things that I'm still kind of waiting around and looking for and being like, I wonder when this one is going to show up. And so really fun time exploring the future and getting very tangible and creating experiences, even before a lot of the technical stack was available to play around with. So a lot of wizard of Oz, a lot of prototyping, a lot of looking at what experience and user experience design might be, even before knowing that these primitives were possible. And so the reason why I stayed in it, I think, was really for the people. Met a lot of designers who were doing really interesting, truly creative things that you couldn't do with the current stack of tools we had available to us. And I think it was this idea of looking at a frontier and saying, like, what is this going to be? What can we make it out to be? And always a little bit of hope and investment in the future of what it is right now, and the present state of it is very young. It's kind of like, we always refer to it as like technological puberty, of like, it's kind of figuring out what it wants to be. It's having a couple of temper tantrums here and there. But I think always there was this idea deeper around coordination technologies and how you start to understand this stack of technology from not just what is possible in interaction design and in organizations doing what they could internally. But this idea of interoperability and building in Lego style of being able to connect and do bigger things in a more coordinated manner. So glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Great. Sio, you want to go next? Thanks for the great intro, Shuya.
Yeah, I'm Sio. Thanks for having me and for the introduction. I mean, from my side, it was pretty normal, the intro to Web3. I started to buy tokens and wanted to get to the moon, but I wasn't going to the moon. Yeah. But beside of that, while I was doing trading or buying tokens and getting into Web3 with the first contact with tokens, I learned that it's not just currencies out there. There are also kind of smart contracts, and this was kind of the kickstart of the interest into blockchain technologies. Back then, I got kind of introduced to Aragon through Samuel. He was the prior tech lead at Aragon. Yeah, and then I realized that kind of two functionalities or two approaches with blockchain is pretty decent here. I mean, one, of course, are the currencies, and the other one is definitely governance on-chain, because I believe those two things make economy more accessible for everyone. Yeah, and then I started at Aragon. Pretty went deep on a rabbit hole because I love to learn and as a designer anyways, and so I really got deep into smart contracts, governance, token-based governance, you know, like all those topics. And since then, yeah, we are building kind of a new application for DAOs, make it more human-friendly, because for me, the Web3 is still like in the young ages, like Web 1, you know, like back in the 90s, it's super technical. It's hard to get access, you know, like you had to install your ISDN modem drivers, and if it doesn't work, you had to call like a specialist, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and this is kind of the state. And for me, it's super motivating, because I was always a little bit sad that I was not growing up in this time, so I was able to build for the web or the new internet, you know. And now it feels kind of, I can finally go on with a newer web. That's kind of a summary how I get into Web3.
Great, Hugo.
Hey all, yeah, thanks for the intro, and it's very, very nice to be talking with you guys. I have to say it's the first kind of recorded Zoom call in this style for me, so I'm excited, but I feel a little bit nervous. But I'm just happy to be here. And yeah, I see some parallels definitely. Also with Sio, when you explained that you got into it with buying tokens. I mean, I think after a few wild years working a lot in the beginning of 2001, I, for the first time, had kind of a bit of money on the side. And I was then taking this, and I was like, okay, what can I actually do if you have something, like, what do you do with the money? And before that, I was really not so much into economy, or like I was just like, you know, not really thinking about what is money or like investing or all that stuff. And this was really for me, yeah, kind of the first time I was like, okay, researching a bit, actually really like thinking about what's money, what can you do with money if you have something to put somewhere and not want to leave it on your bank account. And that got me then, obviously, this journey began, and it got me also to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And it basically blew me away. I think it was very exciting for me, because I felt like, okay, this is a whole world. I didn't know it was so big. I didn't know there was so many scenes and such a universe. And it was really fascinating. Of course, from Bitcoin, then I moved on and then really discovered other projects, specifically, of course, in the Web3 and the creator economy. And this is when things really got interesting, also from a graphic design standpoint. I'm coming from like more, let's say, traditional graphic design, so book design, magazine typography, but also I always did a lot of web design. But I didn't I didn't know about this this whole space, and it blew me away because I found it the energy is so refreshing, and I really felt like it's a Wild West, and people have found a real openness and a really fresh energy. I felt, and it really also felt like what I imagined this time when the internet was kind of really started, and I was too young at this time, but I felt like, okay, this is something that people have this energy of like, okay, we can kind of build something from scratch, and we can kind of, build our own universes, and found this incredibly refreshing. And yeah, I'm publishing a magazine called Present, and it's all about how we work, why we work, and it's really about empowering creators. And so that was a bit for me the spark to really see maybe I can combine this, like my kind of newfound passion for this interesting space, and I was really wondering how can I combine this maybe, and I also realized how many stereotypes there are, and of my friends and people from my bubble. I was like, hey, hey, I found this amazing new technology, and yeah, blockchain, and it's so fascinating. And everyone was just like, another white dudes from Silicon Valley, and like stop with that, and like I don't know, everyone was kind of put off, but I was like the opposite. I was like, I swear to you, if you like research a bit and dig a bit deeper, you'll realize that it's really different from the cliches. That's what I believe. I think it's really the first time like everyone in the world can participate, create something, and the world is different now. It's like so connected, and I find it beautiful. I'm always a bit too optimistic, but I'm really have hope for this space and where this is going.
I think you're definitely right, Hugo. And Charlotta Bunarova, the co-founder of We3, she was actually mentioning that when you're working in design, you have to navigate the future, because designers have an eye for details. And obviously, nobody knows what the future is going to be like, and especially more when you look at the whole Web3 space. When we take the word design, especially in Web3, there's so many different kinds of design, right? There's tokenomics design, product design. You can really cover any specific topic. And this is why we're really going to take the opportunity. I think we can start a deep dive with Shuya, and you can discuss how you've been researching and working on regenerative design practices, and what can Web3 and anyone in the space learn from nature, and what can we learn from radishes, from lobsters. So Shuya, tell us all about it. And Hugo and Sio, don't hesitate if you have any questions along the way.
Hugo, I want to hear more about this magazine. I feel like it's in a funny way, the magazine industry in print format maybe took a little bit of a decline, but I'm loving all the zines that I'm seeing popping up. But like, give me something on paper. Like I want to have a thing that cannot give me notifications while I am reading it, trying to consume it. Like, yes, let's go back to like slow technology. Okay, I could talk about nature for hours. So I'm gonna limit myself to just 3 examples here, but we can go on and on and on. It's a whole book in this. So the reason why this started was I think that similarly, a lot of my creative friends were like, "What are you doing in this Web3 space?" And I was like, "Guys, I was in this before it was called Web3. I didn't know what I was doing. It was interesting. Like there's a lot of stuff to be designed. It's not just like how it looks, but also the tokenomics and all the layers underneath." But at that time, in our systems change practice at IDEO, we were really trying to understand like what is actually the strongest and most compelling use cases and applications of design and the discipline of design within climate change. And so one of the references that I want to throw out here is Stuart Brand's framework of pace layering, which is that a system will shift at different speeds and at different paces. And the slowest shifting one is climate. And then on top of those, you have culture, which is a little bit faster than climate, depends on it, but still shifts pretty quickly. And then faster than that, governance, infrastructure, commerce. And then on top of that, the fastest shifting lever is fashion. And so what I think is fascinating about Web3 is that infrastructure, governance, and commerce are kind of all smooshed into one. And culture is sort of this layer that's just starting to come onto scene. And so what was really interesting to me about that was trying to understand, like, is there a bridge between Web3 and how people are thinking about regenerative design, which is, I think, systems that really do a good job of emulating natural and alive organisms and are able to replenish themselves. And so it was an exploration that was like, I don't know if there is a bridge, there may not be dots to connect. And to be totally honest, I'm still on that exploration, like, are the dots connected, or have I just tried really hard to connect them? But the framework that I really have found to be grounded in this space, whether it's talking to the folks over in the regenerative finance space, or whether it's folks who are really trying to understand, like, how do we design for people in a climate era, or people who are just starting up new organizations in Web3, what I found really helpful is to think about it this way, where designers are really good at creating new incentives. Web3 is incredibly good at creating new incentives. All of the value that we have in Web3 today was at one point in time non-existent, and now, because of the belief in that it has value, it now does. So these new incentives, whether they're monetary, whether they are nudges at the deep psychological layer, whether they are social incentives for belonging, these incentives are things that creatives can design for. When you have new incentives, what you're trying to understand here then in the next step is how you design for behavior change. What is the new behaviors that you can get people to do, whether it's because of a physically built thing and people start to change the way that they move, or it's, there are new financial incentives, and so people who are price sensitive will change their behaviors that way. So these two things, incentive design and behavior change design, are two things creatives very good at doing. What is interesting to look out for now is if that behavior change leads to something that is zero sum and very competitive, which is how a lot of behaviors are designed for today, or if that behavior change is something that spurs collective action, whether it's movement building, whether it's we all should be good players because that's what the incentives push us to do in the system. And once that happens, you end up having a collective and a container that has swung towards believing in something new of value, and you're back in that stage of being able to design new incentives. So incentives, behavior change, collective action. It's actually a really interesting mirror to how natural ecosystems work. Those incentives look more like nitrogen and oxygen and nutrients that are being exchanged between ecosystems like lichens and mycelium and root systems. But in many ways, I think that in this moment of Web3 organizations creating themselves and deciding what is the blueprint and what is the pattern for them to exist and how to run themselves in the organization, we have this moment, this window of opportunity to do something a little bit differently. I try and push people to say, like, all right, if you are trying to exist in an ecosystem, if you are trying to build in a way that is composable, that is interoperable, how do you learn from the best of the best that have ever done it throughout the history of time, which to me is nature. So I'll stop rambling on theory. I'm going to give you three very, very quick examples, and then we can nerd out on more if we want to. The first one that I want to talk about is rubber plants. So rubber plants are really interesting since like before industrialization, people have used rubber plants and extracted the rubber to use them in really interesting ways. Rubber bands, caps onto things, soften the blow of impact, erasers, is a whole slew of things. But what's interesting to me about rubber plants is that in the industrial era, we figured out that if you add sulfur to rubber while you are creating a product, you push the rubber to go through a process called vulcanization, which just keeps it smoother and keeps it from degrading and eroding and lasts a lot longer. And so what I think is really interesting about this is that rubber plants grow near moonflowers. And one of the main things that moonflowers emit is sulfur. And so I try and push organizations to think about this when they're just evolving and thinking about how to structure themselves and their incentives. It's like, how do you think about this relationship between rubber plants and moonflowers and really think about growing in partnership along with another organization? They evolved close to the same time. And the theory goes is that they helped each other really become species that went from being relatively fragile. It's like, what do you do with these things? To being able to strengthen each other. And so that's like first one, big lesson from nature, evolve in partnership with your other DAOs, with other organizations, with sub-DAOs, whatever it is that you're working on, trying to understand, like, it's not necessarily, oh, someone's doing something similar to what I'm doing. It's not necessarily a competitive relationship. Where do you end up finding the collaborative points? The second one that I really love is lobsters. So lobsters, I think, they're conditionally immortal, which is a very specific kind of creature out there in nature. And it's this weird thing where they don't ever die unless they get stuck in their shells. And so lobsters will molt every so often. And as long as they are able to say, like, okay, it's time to molt, I need to get out of my shell that I'm comfortable in. I'm going to be really vulnerable and easy to kill for a little bit of time because my shell is really soft. As long as I can move out of my old shell, and have the energy to grow into a new one and know when the time to move on and change is, they'll live pretty much forever. Like it's not, we haven't really found a lobster that has died from old age yet. They've only died from being eaten or kept in their shells for too long. And I think that that's something that's so fascinating about the transition between Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. I mean, I remember early days of Collab when we were hosting like Tim Berners-Lee in the room, who's just like, oh, like I remember these conversations about decentralization. Like it's kind of the same thing, but like a new generation, a new language around it. And so it just makes me think, Hugo, I'm super fascinated here what you're seeing in this like shift between Web 2 and Web 3, because a lot of the principles, I think a lot of the philosophy that's underlying what's interesting about connectivity, about the internet, I think at the core, it is the same. It's just this moment of it's time to molt. It's time to move on and grow a new shell and look a little bit different. But that like lifeline of what is the internet about, I think there's a through line there that stays the same. So second thing to learn from nature is just, you can be conditionally immortal, you can last for a long time, but to last for a really long time, know when to change, know when to be vulnerable, and know when to build up resources again. And then the third one, I'll stop talking and pause and like go on for a while. I think I want to talk about hermit shells or hermit crabs, which is a lot of crustaceans in today's conversation, but here's the reason why hermit snails are fascinating. So they wait in line to trade shells, right? So when a hermit crab is like, I need a new shell, it's getting a little cramped in here, I want to do another one, they'll wait around an empty shell that they find that might not be the right size for them, because then all of the other hermit shells will come around and say like, hey, I also need a new shell. Let me just wait here and line up and like have a full gathering. And so this entire gathering of hermit shells will get together. And then one of them will say, all right, it's time, I'm getting out of my shell. And all of them will come out of the shells and then move into their new shells one by one by one. And so I think that that's just another example of like, how do you coordinate strategic change? So it's Ethereum Merge Week. There's a lot of coordination that's happening right now. And there's a lot of change that's happening. So amidst the chaos of one change happening, how do you look at that and really say, all right, there are a lot of things that are changing. How do we, as an ecosystem of people who have a shared interest or a shared hard problem in this space, map a collective future together, set up our dominoes and say, all right, let's go do it all at once. And to be able to think about it as this is going to be something that is beneficial for all of us, instead of trying to do it one by one, have a little bit of coordinated action and a little bit of strategy towards what you're trying to do. And so I think that across all of these examples is very much around the thesis of change, how and when to do it. And I think that fundamentally what's exciting to me still about Web3 and the ways that you start to map towards nature is how do you coordinate all of your incentives? How do you coordinate your behavior change? And how do you really push for that coordinated collective action that really changes an entire ecosystem and shifts it all at once for both efficiency's sake, but I think also that this stack of technologies uniquely unlocks moments and the ability to transfer enough information to make those decisions efficiently and effectively at the same time. Three things from nature for today, many more, but I'm gonna pause there and turn it over to someone else. I really want to hear about if that resonates with like the organizations and the structures that that y'all are building.
Yeah, I mean, before Sio and Hugo can give feedback, I just had like a very fast question actually. When you're researching nature, obviously, it's a beautiful ecosystem. Everything seems linked together. And you're talking about, you know, to incentivize and behavior. And when you're looking at Web3, sure, it's Ethereum merge and everyone's happy about it. But there's all these different things going on in the space. And in a way, we could argue that there's a lot of selfish behaviors. So I don't know if in nature you can do a parallel. There are examples of selfish behaviors in nature, right? But obviously, it seems that there's a harmony in nature that is harder to find currently, especially when you look at the Web3 space. Obviously, you don't have the masses that are there yet, right? So nature, it's out there, everyone sees it. You might like it, not like it, but it's there to stay. With Web3, I guess the main question, and I turn to you, Sio and Hugo, in terms of what Shuya said, is do you think that it is here to stay? And in terms of design, how can we improve it so that it is kind of similar to nature and there's a whole process that is smooth for everyone, basically?
My last point on that, I think that's a fascinating thing that you're bringing up. I mean, Darwin's entire like theory of evolution was that it was competition that brought you to new and evolved forms of life. So that's worth remembering too. Like there is a lot of competition and competitiveness for resources, and I think that's why you design for resilience, and that's why you design for different ways of your organization to work. But I would say that there was a blind spot in understanding that a lot of ecosystems work in coordination. So people didn't understand how lichens worked for the longest time. They're like, I don't like this is a baffling example of something that exists as an organism in nature, until they sort of zoomed out and was like, what if it's that they're in a collaborative relationship instead of a competitive one for resources, not necessarily parasitic, but a really collaborative one. And so I think that that's like interesting, is that there was a big shift in the way that biologists and evolutionary scientists thought about natural ecosystem from competitive to collaborative. And so I wonder if that is a similar sort of shift that we're seeing in the internet space right now. Okay, that's it for me.
Very interesting. I'm a bit worried in terms of time that we're going to be able to fit in. So Sio, go for it in terms of DAOs and wallet security. Yeah, maybe we can try Hugo and Sio, you try to do 5 minutes each, and then we'll dive into like questions and go into like overarching topics. I think I'll be easier that way. I'm sorry to put like a leash on time, but if not, we're not going to be able to make it work.
No worries at all. I mean, I enjoyed already kind of the talk about lobster and Web3 comparison. Yeah, so pretty interesting, and also to maybe step on or going on with this topic. I mean, DAOs are super interesting in my opinion, because it makes governance accessible. Also with the tokens back then in 2017, I was super shocked how easy it is to buy tokens. Okay, so I mean, like when you compare this with interactive brokers, with this on-ramp and verification and KYC and all that stuff, it's not really accessible for I would say like a normal user, or not a user which is a specialist in, for example, stocks and all that stuff. Yeah, and the same is applying, in my opinion, in governance, because at the end, governance is not really accessible. I mean, even I'm from Switzerland. I would say like we have one of the modernest governance processes on the world, also with the structure and so on. But nevertheless, I essentially do not now know if my vote was conducted. Yeah, I mean, I send a letter with my sign and my choice to my town, and they then digitalize it and send it then for conducting all the votes. Yeah, but I mean, this way of conducting my own vote is not really transparent. So for me, it's about making it transparent by on-chain governance, and also educate while you do this, okay? Because what we also learned in the research when I started at Aragon, the biggest issue was, yeah, I mean, Aragon is one of the OGs in terms of on-chain governance / DAOs, okay? But it was mostly suited to developers. And when we look into the world, it's less than 1% are developers. So if we want to go with this concept of on-chain governance, it's about make it accessible. So with the newest iteration, it's really those 2 points. Okay, so the transparent and the easy to use governance, so you can spin up by yourself. And also the modularity to define your own governance process, because it's not always about sending tokens, okay? And then to understand how you build this governance processes, okay? So with educational layers in it, helping people, especially because we are in a permissionless and self-custodian environment, okay? So as soon as you have submitted or signed your transaction with your wallet, it's permanent. You can't change it. It's distributed, okay?
How do you educate? Like, how do you design the experience? Because obviously with the whole space, in terms of experience, like ease of use, there is a massive problem. If you go on any website of any blockchain almost, it's very complicated to understand. So even going back to DAOs, obviously, I would hope our audience would know what it is, but if they don't, that's okay. Like, can you just give a one-line reminder of what it is? And also why it matters, and how can we, as you were already discussing, how can we improve the design in terms of DAOs?
DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations, which can be based on wallets, tokens, and hopefully other definitions of communities or a subset of communities in the future, which you can do proposals on chain, which gets executed after a vote period. And those vote periods can also really be diverse, okay? I mean, we see it in the market out there. Any DAO is different. Some are on-chain, some are off-chain, some have different steps in the voting process as MakerDAO with polling and then executive proposals, etc. How do we make it more accessible? With the research, I mean, like when you do a proposal with current products, it's like, hey, do your proposal, but you don't really have inline help or further help resources. I mean, there are some blog posts, there are some ideas or threads about how to do it in a proper way. But in the new product, it's kind of always when you go into a process, you have inline help. So overall in a certain step, then inline when you do have to input data, and in addition, an external educational layer. So this means in each step, which is super important to be aware what you are doing, because it's permanent. As soon as you have submitted it on chain, you have like how-tos, explanation of each configuration, bad practices, good practices, examples to others, and when we build up on these resources, it's also the intention in the future that Aragon will be kind of an ecosystem for the DAOs. Okay, so this brings then the way in of this modularity. And let's imagine we are 5 years in advance. Maybe you are able to fork a whole DAO because their governance system is working properly. It's proved it was never hacked. They had no flaws in proposals or whatsoever. Yeah.
Do you think that DAOs is a good term to use?
No.
Obviously, it's huge in the space. But I want to take the recent example, maybe not the best example, but of Starbucks, right? Of like the Starbucks Odyssey. They're using NFTs, but they're not using the word NFT. And
yeah.
if you talk to your friends, designers, creators, and they're not in the Web3 space, and that's a question for all three of you, is would the word DAOs, NFTs, DeFi work?
In my opinion, maybe shortly to the DAO word. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned it. We had today, again, a talk with some product managers and so on. We may gonna remove the word DAO. Because everybody tells they are a DAO. I mean, even if it's just an invite to a Discord, yet another Discord, yeah. Secondly, what does mean a DAO? Does it have to be on-chain, especially with CK tech? It can be, for example, we have this concept of O-vote, which is off-chain voting with on-chain execution. Is it still a DAO? Is it a DAO when you have different definitions of token-based or reputation-based community gathering? Okay, so I like it to call it more like a digital organization, and that's it.
This is a really interesting discussion, but actually it doesn't make sense to call it NFT and DAOs. I think we are all, as humans, so visual and audio visual, it's like, it's so easy to be kind of seduced or distracted by certain words or images. And you have like, we have all such a big imagination, and it also, it's a good thing, but also I feel it's sometimes maybe like blocking in the wrong sense. So I think for me it's a big topic. Like I feel like everything that a lot of what I'm doing is really out of necessity, because I'm finding things in my life that I'm really passionate about, that I really believe in. And then I want to spread the word, right? Like be it to my friends or my close community, but also to the rest of the world. So that's basically what I'm doing with the Present magazine. There's a lot of topics in there that I really, really love and that really helped me. Let's say talking about meditation, mindfulness, or just like habits, or or like psychology, work psychology, and a lot of topics like that. Sometimes people have such a stereotypical view of these topics. Let's say meditation. I really think it's an important part of my life, and then I'm telling someone maybe from my old buddies and as an example, and they're like, it's not for me. I'm not the kind of meditation guy, even though they have never tried. So what I'm doing with my tools available, and my tool is graphic design, I'm trying to kind of, I don't know if seduce, I don't have a better word right now, but I'm trying to make these things that I find important. I try to make them more approachable or accessible, or let's say more sexy sometimes, more attractive, because I feel that is maybe a chance to get the people to actually try it out. I'm not trying to like convince anyone. I'm not trying to be a missionary, but I'm just believing so much in the power of visuals. So I want to use this power for a good thing. And at the same, I think I'm trying to do with Web3, it's very niche still, and that's totally normal and okay. But my dream, of course, is that many more people in the world come to this space, because I really think it would make a difference. And so what I'm trying to do is to find the right balance or the right tone, the right strategy, to basically make people realize, hey, it's maybe try to let go of your stigmas and give it a chance. I'm trying to make it easier maybe for people to give the space a chance. And this is what we are doing, for example, with Newfoundation, or recently we launched a NEWFORUM website.
You were discussing like how to make things in a way sexy, right? With design, graphic design. And I think that's a good way actually to go back to all three of you in terms of when you look at the whole Web3 space, and there's so many topics, right? But if there's one or two things that you would really, I think in the case of Sio, it's probably governance, but what would you like to communicate and say, this needs to be more sexy? And what would you think would be a way to look at it, to try to make it more sexy? So it could be DAO governance, gamifying the space. It could be, just basic design typography. Like if you could go see like, the big projects of Web3 and tell them, okay, this should be improved in terms of the design area, what would you tell them? Obviously not an easy question. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in. Hot takes. Okay, so that like the best design is invisible design. There's that moment that will happen inevitably, as it does with every technology that lasts for a long time. I'm not making any predictions here, but let's say it does last for a long time. It's that Wi-Fi moment, right? Starbucks isn't calling and their membership tokens NFTs because they don't have to. Like their customers are like, I want my coffee. Whatever technology you're using to make me get the coffee, it doesn't matter. It's fine. So I think that's what I'm the most excited about, is like, what is the Hugo, like it's that phrase that comes to mind is like, artists make the revolution irresistible. And so in some ways, right, some part of this has become irresistible to, for example, Starbucks, or for example, other players who are able to take design from the very forward-facing version of design to the very back end level infrastructural design, where you don't know it's happening. It's kind of magic, but it enables you to do something that is a little bit easier, a little bit more convenient in your life. So that's kind of the straight cut forward, like make it so good that it's irresistible, and then make it so good that it's invisible. And those two things, irresistibility and invisibility, working hand in hand, I think really advances what you're able to do with this technology stack. I think the second thing is another bit of a paradox, which is when I'm looking at ZK Snarks, I'm like, okay, what that's really digging at, in the same ways that NFTs and smart contracts started to delve into how do you have programmable trust, right? Trust between trustless players. ZK Snarks to me is starting to flag what happens when you have this paradox apparently between privacy and transparency. And so now you're really playing around with physics in a different way where society wasn't really able to transact before. And so that's fascinating to me, because now you're getting into the space where design used to get stuck in these paradoxes of human values and core belief systems. And how are we, with these new paradigms, being able to make certain things transparent and certain things very much hidden and abstracted, so that you're able to have both privacy and transparency, both trust and programmable trust. And so it's like the ever-evolving question that's interesting to me about design in this space is, how are you making these intangibles, these like very ineffable abstractions that are important to being people and being in a society, something that's graspable and something that you can build on top of. So those are the two things. It's like irresistible and invisible design, and then everything that is like very paradoxical about this ecosystem that we're in.
Very, very well said, Shuya. From for me, it's also about this paradigm and also those topics, but maybe in a more, I would love to make the educational layer sexy, because you operating in a permissionless, self-custodian and permanent, and you have to manage it. So how might we make education that you operate securely and also be aware what you're operating with and with whom, even the person is a stranger and you don't know this person, in a secure way. Because for me, and this goes then maybe back to the wallet, seed phrase, security, and all that stuff, there it starts when you get into Web3, because you own something and you own this wallet, which could be an identity, which could be your reputation in work, which could be your voting ID, and also in real life applications or scenarios. So for me, it's really about this education about this space, because I believe if there is no proper education, which may be playful, it's harder to get in. And I see it is in real life. I mean, like I onboard per year at least, I would say like 100 people into Web3, because I love to teach kind of about this topic. And I see this, I mean, it's less than 10% which operates then regularly in Web3, because it's not accessible, because they don't understand it further than what I teach them before.
I love it. Make education sexy. I think that nails it, because that's really the first step. And I think, just like to go back to the example of NEWFORUM, it's just like the most direct example I have, because I was trying to figure this out. This like Web3 content with a lot of really, really interesting people. And I think, I try to design it in a way that not only speaks to the people who maybe know already about all these topics, but like how to make it attractive for people outside of our bubble that are already fascinated about the space. And how can I, with graphic design tools, let's say, or art direction, make this more easy to digest also, or easy to just get started reading these articles or getting to know these people. Because I really believe once you just read one good article about this whole universe, I think I really believe that's the stepping stone, and that what makes people really want to dive deeper. And then I believe most of the people are interested and want to learn more, and that is a bit the goal, I think.
Yeah, I think it's designing really something that speaks not only to people in Web3, but also in Web2. In traditional business, you have like what they call the customer effort score, like the effort that you need to do. And when you look at the Web3 space, and I won't name anyone, but if you look at wallets or at exchanges, or when you need to swap a token, the experience for the user is very, very complicated. So it's irresistible, because everyone loves the Web3 culture and everything behind it. There's companies that are leading the market in certain areas, but in terms of user experience, there's a lot that can be done in terms of designing the product, in terms of the user experience. And it feels like right now there's just a wave of, okay, everyone in Web3 is happy, but if we want to onboard the masses, it does feel, and that's the last question I have with you in the last 3 minutes, is how can we design a better experience when it comes to education or gamifying kind of the whole space? Or how do you interact with your friends? Like, how do we make it more sexy? How do we make the education better, basically? Should I point at Shuya?
I'll go. It's play.
Okay, right.
I think it's play, right? It's like, how do you actually give people the tools to be able to try stuff out without it being necessarily tied to monetary stakes at the beginning, right? Like that entrance story of it being tokens being the first thing that you go to, versus it being something totally weird that you're coming into the Web3 space in. I think it matters. And I think that the decoupling of this is a financialization of everything versus this is a connectivity of everything, and the financialization of it is secondary. I think that it's two very different approaches and two very different groups of people within Web3 and very different cultures. And so how do you allow people to practice the like emotional regulation for yourself that comes with, I'm working with tokens in a space, and that means that the value of them will go up and down. How do you start to either give you a little bit of a sense of, well, it's going to go up and down every day, and that's something to get used to, and it's more about the utility of what you can do with the tokens than the livelihood that you're able to make by transacting these. And so I think that differentiation between, are you transacting or are you doing something different here? What does that mean for you emotionally, so that you remove the layer of fear of losing value and start to be able to play around with what are the new kinds of value to be defined and to be understood in this Web3 space. So I think that's it. It's like, how do you create sandboxes and playgrounds that feel really safe and feel really much more about like, I can feel the utility of it, but I am understanding that utility through a bit of a practice round in a safe space.
I second that fully. I mean, I compare this again with wallets. Wallets right now is just like, save your seed phrase, save, you have to store it offline, blah, blah, blah. But what does it mean to have a seed phrase? What does it mean to have different wallets? What does it mean to interact with the wallet with different applications, and so on and so on? For myself, it would be really about the playful onboarding while you learn how to operate. The same with any kind of application as well. I mean, for example, in the new Aragon app, you will be able to create a test DAO on testnet, play around with the whole thing. The future, it should be also kind of setting up all your different governance processes. And then when you are ready and have understood what are the implications and all the functionalities and so on, you can then deploy it on mainnet or whatever chain you want to. Yeah. So it's really playful onboarding with education.
Well said, both of you. I think you really nailed it. I think I would say the best way to learn always is to make something yourself. I think this is a nice chance, and this space is really made for that. Like, we should really make it easier for people to actually participate, actually build something, and also encourage people about this, and also show amazing examples, I think, and also show the people behind the projects. I think this is something I'm fascinated about, to actually, you know, who are actually these people, and who's in this space, and really participate, and keeping this ethos of, maybe it's the Web1 ethos, you know, like everyone can participate. It's like a really open space, and no one should like feel excluded. Yeah, that's what I love about this, and I think we should make this more sexy.
Education and make it more sexy are the words of the end lobsters also. Well, thank you so much for being part of today's forum. And yeah, if you want to get more involved with our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms on Twitter, NEWFORUM_NCO. You can look forward to the new NEWFORUM website coming up soon that Hugo mentioned. And be sure to check out the socials, of course, of Shuya, Sio, and Hugo. Thank you to everyone for being here, and have a great day. And it was great having you guys.
Same.
Awesome.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.